If you grew up in a Jewish household in the 1950s or 1960s, you remember the sacred, comforting aroma that filled the apartment hallways and stairwells every Saturday morning. Long before modern electric slow cookers, programmable crock pots, or digital pressure cookers existed, our mothers had a time-honored method of slow cooking that lasted 18 to 24 continuous hours without ever touching the stove once sundown arrived on Friday evening. It was the ancient law of the Sabbath, but it was also one of the greatest culinary inventions in human history. By letting heavy earthenware bean pots, black cast-iron Dutch ovens, and vintage enamel roasters sit in gentle, unhurried warmth all through the night. Humble budget cuts of tough meat, dried legumes, root vegetables, and whole grains melted together into deep, mahogany-colored stews that could nourish the body, soothe the spirit, and feed a crowded family table for pennies. Today, I am taking you back to my mother's kitchen to share the 25 forgotten overnight Shabbat pots that defined an entire golden era of home cooking. Number 25 is the classic Ashkenazi beef flanken and pearl barley cholent. This is the undisputed monarch of the Friday night pots, the recipe that anchored our family table for 3 generations. My mother started by searing 3 pounds of thick, bone-in beef flanken, also known as English cut short ribs, in a heavy black cast-iron Dutch oven with 2 generous tablespoons of golden rendered chicken schmaltz. Once the meat developed a dark, crackling brown crust on all sides, she removed it briefly and layered the bottom of the pot with 2 cups of dried Great Northern white beans that had soaked overnight in cold water. Over the beans went 1 cup of whole pearl barley, 4 large halved yellow onions with their golden papery skins left on for rich color, 4 peeled russet potatoes cut into thick halves, and 2 split beef marrow bones nestled right in the center of the pot. She placed the seared flanken on top, poured in cold water to cover everything by 2 full inches, stirred in 2 tablespoons of sweet Hungarian paprika, a tablespoon of coarse kosher salt, and plenty of freshly cracked black pepper. She brought the pot to a brief boil on the stovetop, sealed the heavy lid with a layer of aluminum foil, and slid it into the low oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. By Saturday noon, 18 hours later, the barley had absorbed the rich, buttery beef marrow, turning into a creamy, savory porridge, while the flanken meat literally fell away from the bones at the gentlest touch of a fork. Number 24 is the Sephardic hameen, with whole, unpeeled eggs nestled in brown onion skins. In Sephardic, Mediterranean, and Middle Eastern Jewish homes, the overnight Sabbath pot took on a warm, exotic character filled with whole chickpeas, rich beef shank, whole heads of garlic, and a fragrant pinch of ground cumin, allspice, and cinnamon bark. But the true crowning glory of the hameen pot was the eggs. Mother washed fresh, whole, raw farm eggs very gently under cold water, leaving the shells completely intact, and nestled them deep between the layers of meat, potatoes, and chickpeas, surrounding each egg with clean, dry brown onion skins gathered from the bottom of the pantry bin. As the pot cooks undisturbed for 18 hours in the gentle oven heat, the eggs slowly absorb the steam, the rendered meat fats, and the natural brown pigments from the onion skins. By Saturday lunchtime, when you tap and peel the brittle shells, the egg whites have transformed into a deep, marbleized mahogany brown, called haminados, with a creamy, custard-like yolk that tastes rich, nutty, and gently smoky, unlike any hard-boiled egg you have ever tasted in your life. Number 23 is stuffed beef kishki, rolled in unbleached parchment paper and nestled atop the bean pot. Kishki, traditionally known as stuffed derma, was born out of the frugal genius of the immigrant butcher shops. My grandmother mixed finely ground beef suet, or rendered chicken fat, with 2 cups of coarse matzah meal, 2 finely grated yellow onions, a shredded carrot, celery salt, sweet paprika, garlic powder, and coarse black pepper until it formed a thick, pliable paste. She shaped the seasoned mixture into a thick cylinder, wrapped it securely in unbleached parchment paper tied at both ends with cotton butcher twine, and rested it directly on top of the simmering beans, potatoes, and barley inside the Dutch oven, right before placing the heavy lid on. Throughout the long, quiet night, the porous parchment paper allows the fragrant herbal steam of the beef stew to penetrate the kishki while keeping the delicate dumpling from dissolving into the liquid. When sliced into thick rounds on Saturday afternoon, the interior is rich, fluffy, and deeply savory, providing the ultimate comforting accompaniment to the melting beef. Number 22 is the sweet and savory carrot tsimis, with beef short ribs and sweet dried prunes. Tsimis was the celebratory pot that bridged the gap between sweet holiday joy and deep winter nourishment. Mother layered thick rounds of fresh sweet carrots, cubed orange sweet potatoes, dried California prunes, plump golden raisins, and 2 pounds of beef short ribs into a heavy ceramic roasting vessel. She poured in 2 cups of cold water mixed with 3 tablespoons of raw clover honey, a whole stick of Ceylon cinnamon, and a pinch of ground ginger and nutmeg. As this pot cooks overnight in the low oven, the natural fruit sugars in the prunes, carrots, and raisins slowly caramelize into a thick, glossy dark amber glaze that coats the tender beef ribs. The result is a heavenly sweet and savory harmony, where the meat pulls apart in luscious ribbons and the vegetables melt on your tongue like rich, savory candy. Number 21 is the overnight potato kugel, baked until an impossibly deep mahogany bottom crust forms. While modern cooks bake potato kugel for an hour to achieve a pale golden top, the true old-fashioned Sabbath kugel was baked slowly in a heavy cast-iron roaster for 14 continuous hours at 215 degrees Fahrenheit. Mother grated russet potatoes and yellow onions on the finest, sharpest teeth of the box grater, squeezed out the bitter water by hand, and stirred in warm rendered schmaltz, 4 beaten eggs, coarse salt, and a generous amount of coarse black pepper. She poured the thick batter into a preheated, heavily greased cast iron skillet, sealed the top tightly with 2 layers of heavy aluminum foil, and placed it in the oven on Friday evening. Over the long night, the starches in the grated potatoes slowly caramelize and brown throughout the entire pan, turning the interior into a soft, velvety brownish pudding, while the bottom and edges form an impossibly thick, crunchy, caramelized crust that the family eagerly fought over at the lunch table. Number 20 is the slow-simmered white bean and garlic shank pot with whole marrow bones. When meat prices were high and the family budget was tight, my mother visited the kosher butcher and purchased inexpensive beef marrow shanks. She browned the thick shanks deeply in cast iron with 3 whole heads of unpeeled garlic cut in half horizontally, then filled a deep bean pot with soaked dried cannellini beans, dried bay leaves, wild thyme, and cold water. Under the gentle 18-hour oven heat, the rich marrow inside the central shank bones liquefies completely into the surrounding liquid, enriching the bean broth with deep natural fats and collagen, while the roasted garlic cloves soften into sweet, spreadable cloves that can be mashed directly into the thick, creamy bean gravy with a wooden spoon to create an unforgettable, hearty sauce. Number 19 is the overnight rolled cabbage holoshkis simmering in a sweet and sour tomato beet broth. Rolling tender cabbage leaves around seasoned ground beef and rice was a labor of love on Friday morning, but the overnight reward was magnificent beyond words. Mother blanched Savoy cabbage leaves in boiling salted water until pliable, stuffed each leaf with ground beef, parboiled white rice, grated sweet onions, and black pepper, and tucked the neat rolls tightly side by side into a deep roasting pan. She poured a rich sauce made from crushed plum tomatoes, freshly grated red beets, fresh lemon juice, dark brown sugar, and golden raisins over the rolls until they were completely submerged. Overnight, the cabbage leaves soften until they can be cut with a fork, absorbing the vibrant sweet and sour tomato beet nectar until every single bite bursts with savory juice. Number 18 is the Moroccan dafina with chickpeas, whole wheat berries tied in cloth, and sweet dried dates. In North African Jewish communities, the Shabbat pot was an architectural masterpiece of separate, distinct flavors cooked together within one large vessel. Mother soaked whole dried chickpeas and placed them at the bottom of the pot with beef brisket, whole small potatoes, and marrow bones. In a small clean muslin spice bag, she tied whole wheat berries mixed with crushed garlic, olive oil, and sweet paprika. In another small pouch, she tied long grain rice with saffron threads and sweet dried dates. When the pot was opened on Saturday after 16 hours of low heat, each component was lifted out and arranged on separate serving platters: the deeply spiced beef, the creamy chickpeas, the savory grain pouches, and the mahogany eggs, offering 4 distinct dishes from a single overnight pot. Number 17 is the overnight roast chicken on a thick bed of sliced sweet onions and whole garlic cloves. For families who preferred poultry over beef for Sabbath lunch, my grandmother had a marvelous overnight technique that produced the juiciest chicken imaginable. She sliced 5 large Spanish onions into thick half-inch rings and lined the entire bottom of a heavy enamel Dutch oven to create a thick vegetable cushion. She rubbed a whole 5-pound roasting chicken inside and out with coarse salt, sweet paprika, dried thyme, and warm rendered schmaltz, resting the bird breast side up on the onion cushion with 0 added water. She sealed the lid tightly with foil and baked it at 200 degrees Fahrenheit all night long. The onions released their natural sweet juices, creating a rich bed of caramelized onion marmalade that gently braises the dark meat, while the chicken turns so tender that the leg bones slide out clean with 2 fingers. Number 16 is the spiced lamb shank and chickpea pot with whole cinnamon bark and toasted cumin seeds. Lamb shanks contain dense connective tissue and rich bone marrow that modern quick cooking methods leave tough and chewy. In our Friday afternoon preparation, the lamb shanks were seared in a screaming hot cast iron skillet until dark brown on all sides, then placed in a heavy pot with soaked dried chickpeas, sliced leeks, whole peeled carrots, a stick of real Ceylon cinnamon, toasted whole cumin seeds, and a pinch of ground coriander. The low overnight heat slowly dissolves the tough collagen surrounding the lamb bone into silky, bioavailable gelatin, while the warm spices infuse the chickpeas with an exotic, comforting fragrance that warmed our spirits during cold, rainy seasons. Number 15 is the slow-baked apple and cinnamon noodle kugel with golden raisins. Not every overnight pot was savory. For a sweet Sabbath lunch treat that made the whole house smell like a bakery, Mother cooked wide egg noodles until just tender, then tossed them in a large ceramic bowl with melted sweet butter or schmaltz, 4 beaten farm eggs, grated tart green apples, dark brown sugar, ground cinnamon, and plump golden raisins that had soaked in sweet Concord wine. She poured the noodle mixture into an earthenware baking dish, covered it tightly with foil, and let it bake at 200 degrees for 12 hours. The noodles on the bottom and sides caramelize into a golden, chewy crust, while the interior noodles soften into a sweet, custardy pudding that perfumed the entire home with the scent of baked apples and spice. Number 14 is the beef goulash pot with deep sweet paprika, whole sweet onions, and whole caraway seeds. Hungarian Jewish families brought their beloved goulash into the overnight Shabbat tradition by adjusting the liquid carefully. Mother cut beef chuck roast into large 2-inch cubes, tossed them with 3 tablespoons of imported sweet Hungarian paprika, and layered them into a Dutch oven with 4 thickly sliced onions and a teaspoon of crushed caraway seeds. She added only half a cup of water, trusting the mountain of onions to release their natural moisture as they heated. Over 16 hours, the onions melt completely into a thick, velvety, deep red sauce that coats the beef cubes, resulting in a rich, deeply savory stew that needed only a thick piece of crusty rye bread to wipe the bowl completely clean. Number 13 is the whole stuffed onion pot filled with spiced minced meat, rice, and fresh parsley. Making stuffed onions was an art form reserved for special Sabbath afternoons. Mother parboiled large sweet yellow onions for 10 minutes, cooled them in cold water, and gently separated the translucent layers into individual delicate cups. She stuffed each onion cup with a seasoned mixture of finely minced beef, uncooked rice, chopped flat leaf parsley, ground allspice, and a spoonful of tomato paste, then nestled the stuffed onion rolls tightly together in a shallow cast iron pan. Covered in a light broth with lemon juice and a touch of honey, the stuffed onions slowly braise overnight until the onion petals become sweet as silk and the meat filling cooks to juicy perfection. Number 12 is the overnight vegetable and lentil medley with parsnip roots and celery root. For light, frugal Sabbath meals when the meat was scarce, my grandmother combined brown lentils, green split peas, diced yellow parsnips, peeled celery root, carrots, and whole garlic cloves in a ceramic bean pot with cold water, a spoonful of schmaltz, and 2 bay leaves. The dense winter root vegetables release their complex, woodsy natural sugars into the lentils over 14 hours of gentle heat, breaking down the lentils into a thick, hearty, porridge-like stew that provided deep, grounding nourishment on cold autumn mornings. Number 11 is pcha, the classic jellied calf's foot and garlic pot simmered until pure clear gelatin. Calf's foot was the most affordable item at the kosher butcher counter, but our grandmothers knew its immense healing power for joints and digestion. Mother scrubbed the calf's feet meticulously, cracked the center bones with a cleaver, and placed them in a heavy pot with whole yellow onions, whole black peppercorns, salt, and 8 cloves of smashed garlic. She let the pot simmer overnight on low heat for 16 hours until the bones were completely bare. On Saturday morning, she strained the rich broth into shallow glass pans, chopped the soft meat finely, and let it chill in the cold pantry. Within 2 hours, it set into a firm, sparkling, crystal-clear, savory jelly that dissolved on the tongue with a rich burst of garlic and pure bone collagen. Number 10 is the spiced beef cheek and whole potato pot with sweet bay leaves. Beef cheeks are packed with dense, crisscrossing collagen seams that are tough when cooked quickly, but become pure velvet when given time. Mother seared the beef cheeks in cast iron until deeply browned, layered them in a roaster with whole peeled yellow potatoes, whole shallots, red wine, beef broth, and 4 dried bay leaves. After 18 hours in the low oven, the beef cheeks become so tender that you can cut them with a wooden spoon, while the whole potatoes absorb the rich red wine and beef juices until their centers turn as soft and creamy as whipped butter. Number 9 is the overnight rice and chicken pillow, known as Sephardic tebbet, cooked in an enamel Dutch oven. Iraqi Jewish mothers prepared tebbet by taking a whole chicken, stuffing the cavity with seasoned spiced rice, and burying the entire chicken inside a deep pot filled with more rice, diced tomatoes, ground cardamom, cinnamon, and chicken broth. The pot was sealed with foil and placed in a low oven overnight. As the chicken slowly roasts inside the rice cushion, its savory juices and rendered fat drip directly down into the grains. By Saturday morning, the rice at the bottom forms a crisp, golden crust called tahdig, while the interior rice is fragrant, fluffy, and infused with the rich essence of chicken. Number 8 is the braised beef oxtail and butter bean pot with cracked black peppercorns. Oxtail was another inexpensive cut that required the patience of the Sabbath oven to shine. Mother browned the segmented oxtails in hot schmaltz until dark mahogany, then combined them in an earthenware pot with large dried butter beans, sliced leeks, carrots, tomato paste, and 2 tablespoons of coarsely cracked black pepper. The abundant marrow and gelatin inside the oxtail vertebrae melt into the braising liquid over 18 hours, turning the water into a rich, glossy glaze that coats the large, creamy butter beans like velvet. Number 7 is the sweet butternut squash and beef chuck pot with dried apricots and raw honey. In early autumn, when the first frost arrived, Mother diced fresh butternut squash into large cubes, combining them with chunks of beef chuck roast, dried Turkish apricots, a touch of honey, ground ginger, and water in a heavy baking pot. The natural sweetness of the butternut squash and apricots caramelizes slowly overnight, balancing the rich, savory beef chuck and creating a warm, comforting holiday stew that filled the whole dining room with the scent of autumn fruit and slow-cooked meat. Number 6 is the overnight split pea and smoked turkey leg pot. When a whole smoked turkey leg was simmered with green split peas, diced celery, onions, and carrots for 16 hours, the split peas dissolved completely into a rich, velvety cream, while the smoked turkey meat fell off the cartilage in tender, flavorful shreds, infusing the entire pot with a deep, wood-smoked richness that tasted like it had been cooking for days. Number 5 is the whole eggplant and meatball casserole, simmered in rich garlic tomato gravy. Mother rolled small meatballs of seasoned ground beef with breadcrumbs, parsley, and egg, nestling them in a deep Dutch oven between thick slices of salted eggplant and whole sweet peppers. She covered the casserole in a homemade tomato and garlic sauce, letting it braise in the low oven all night long. The eggplant melts into the tomato sauce, creating a thick, rich gravy that enrobes the tender meatballs in pure Mediterranean warmth. Number 4 is the buckwheat groats or kasha and brown mushroom pot baked under a tightly sealed lid. Whole roasted buckwheat groats were tossed with a beaten raw egg and toasted dry in a hot skillet until each grain separated. Mother layered the toasted kasha with fresh wild mushrooms, sliced onions browned in schmaltz, vegetable broth, and black pepper in a ceramic casserole. Overnight, the buckwheat grains absorb the rich mushroom broth without bursting, becoming fluffy, nutty, and wonderfully satisfying alongside roasted meats. Number 3 is the stuffed bell pepper pot, or gefilte paprikash, slow cooked over a thick bed of shredded green cabbage. Mother cored sweet red and green bell peppers, stuffed them with beef and rice, and arranged them upright in a roasting pot on a bed of shredded cabbage tossed with caraway seeds and tomato sauce. The low, unhurried heat softens the peppers until they are as tender as butter, while the cabbage below caramelizes into a sweet, tangy relish that perfectly complements the hearty stuffed peppers. Number 2 is the spiced short rib and prune tagine pot with whole toasted almonds. Beef short ribs were braised overnight with sweet pitted prunes, sliced onions, ground cinnamon, ginger, and turmeric in a heavy conical tagine or Dutch oven. On Saturday afternoon, Mother scattered toasted slivered almonds over the top right before serving. The contrast between the crunchy toasted nuts, the sweet melting prunes, and the falling apart beef short ribs made this one of the most celebrated Sabbath meals in our home. And number 1, the timeless queen of all Friday night pots, is the master hearth cholent, with beef marrow bones, flanken, pinto beans, and whole caramelized onions. This was my grandmother's crowning achievement. Layered with loving precision into a 50-year-old cast iron pot, seasoned with only salt, coarse black pepper, sweet paprika, and the natural richness of marrow and onions. It cooked for 20 full hours in the hearth embers. When the heavy lid was lifted on Saturday afternoon, the steam that rose into the room was the very definition of home, warmth, and family love. Every bean was soft as silk, every potato was stained deep mahogany, and every bite tasted of pure, timeless devotion. I can still picture my mother on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron as the sun began to dip below the tenement rooftops. She would adjust the heavy iron lid on the Dutch oven, slide the pot into the warm oven, and turn the dial down to low. There, she would whisper with a gentle smile, "Now the pot does the work, and we can rest." All through the cold Friday night, as we slept beneath thick wool blankets, that faithful pot was quietly working on our behalf, filling our dreams with the promise of a warm, joyful feast with those we loved most in the world. When Saturday noon arrived, the entire family gathered around the table, singing Sabbath songs and passing the heavy steaming bowl from hand to hand. No matter how difficult the work week had been in the factories and workshops of the city, that single pot of food brought peace, abundance, and deep gratitude to our hearts. My dear friends, These 25 overnight Shabbat pots represent the very heart and soul of traditional Jewish home cooking. You do not need expensive modern gadgets or complicated techniques to feed your family with real, comforting food. You only need a sturdy pot, honest whole ingredients, and the faith to let slow, gentle heat do what it has done for generations. May your home be blessed with the warm, peaceful aroma of slow-simmered stews, the joyful gathering of family around your table, and the timeless comfort of heritage cooking. Cook with love, rest with peace, and enjoy every single spoonful.